We are getting back to our NHL offseason plan series. We continue on with the 27th ranked team in the NHL, the Chicago Blackhawks. What do they have to look forward to this offseason? What are the top questions facing this franchise, and what should we expect in the fall? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the Chicago Blackhawks, what their offseason plan should look like as we approach the full-scale offseason. Now that the playoffs are starting to see teams eliminated, we're really not that far away from seeing a lot of activity here. So in case you're new to this series, first up, we're going to recap quickly their 21-22 NHL season. Secondly, we're going to examine their salary cap situation. Where do they finish at? What do they have to look forward to for available space this offseason? What contracts are expiring in segment 3? RFAs, UFAs, do they sign them, replace them, etc.? And then in segment 4, we look at the top questions facing this franchise as they move forward into next year. So first up, let's take a look at the recap of the 21-22 season for Chicago. It really wasn't all that great of a season. They finished with a record of 28, 42, and 12 for 68 points. As I mentioned, they're ranked 27th overall out of 32 teams in the NHL, so not a great season. Goals for, they ranked 29th with 213. Goals against, they ranked 26th with 289 against. The power play wasn't a whole lot better, 19.2% to be the 21st most effective power play in the NHL, and the penalty kill was 24th at a 76.2% effective rate. So overall, this team did not have a whole lot of success this season. Early in the year, in October, late October, we saw the report released regarding the Kyle Beach situation, and it set off a series of events throughout not only the Blackhawks organization, but around the entire NHL. This team is kind of encompassed and encircled in this controversial situation that happened a long time ago. The team is now trying to recover from it, and we've seen a lot, like I said, not just in Chicago, but former Blackhawks, people that were involved with this around other positions, be either scrutinized or in some cases let go as well. We saw Stan Bowman effectively be out as of October 26th of this past year. The senior director of hockey, Ops McIsaac, was also out. The team was fined $2 million, which really seems like a slap on the wrist compared to the kind of money that the team would make. And of course we saw Joel Quenneville out as coach of the Panthers not long after that, and other members of the Blackhawks organization that were there at the time be questioned and scrutinized. Kevin Cheveldayoff, Marc Bergevin, etc. faced a lot of questions, and obviously they didn't lose their jobs over it, but still, lots of people involved here saw the ripple effect move on. Not long after that, after Bowman was out, we saw Kyle Davidson be named the interim general manager. He later became the full-time general manager after an extensive search. Jeremy Colleton, of course, not long into Davidson's tenure as interim GM, was relieved of his duties and fired in early November. It wasn't long actually at all. We saw a coaching change, and Derek King took over behind the bench throughout the year. We did see some trades as well to kind of change his team a little bit, almost all near the deadline. Marc-Andre Fleury, Brendan Hagel, and Ryan Carpenter all exiting the Hawks organization this year. So it was a team of not much success this year and surrounded by controversy, and they have a lot of repairs to do, not only on the ice, but off the ice as well. Now let's take a look at where their cap situation finished in 21-22 and what they have on the book so far for 22-23. So they obviously finished with a very, very tight cap situation to finish the year. They only had $1,200 in available space, as you can see here from the screenshot from capfriendly.com. They certainly operated near the cap all season. Obviously, the trades of the players we saw indicates the Fleury, they retained salary as well. So certainly weren't too concerned about that. Now, going into next year, they do have 14 NHL contracts on the books already that are valued at $61.4 million. So that's what they've used already in their cap space. They have just over $21 million available, but they do have quite a number of contracts to sign to replace those players that are either expiring, either replace or re-sign those players, because they have 14 contracts. Normally you have 22, 23. So you're looking at between 8 to 9 players that have to fall into that $21 million. So when you think of it that way, it's really not a ton of money. Now let's move over to the contract segment here and take a look at who's expired, who are the RFAs and UFAs that either need to be re-signed or replaced by this Blackhawks franchise for the coming year. Under the RFA category here, we have Dominic Kubalik, Dylan Strome, Kirby Dach, Philip Kurashev, and defenseman Caleb Jones. I would think Dach, Kurashev, and Jones will all be back for sure. Kubalik and Strome, which we'll talk about here in the next segment, I mean, they'll be qualified, and they're not going to just get rid of them, that's for sure. But I do wonder what their future holds with this team, if they're going to be back or not. On the UFA side of things, they do have players that probably won't come back. They're finally going to be moving on from the Andrew Shaw contract, so that'll cut down what's available to be placed on long-term injury reserve. They have defensemen Calvin DeHaan and Eric Gustafsson expiring, and a couple of goalies in Colin Delia and Kevin Lankinen. So there's certainly a number of players there that have to be determined about their future holds, or they have to go out and find a replacement if they're not going to be brought back. They can either look internally, of course, who they can bring up through their system, or externally into free agency or trades and how to handle this team. Now, what are the top burning questions facing this franchise as we move into the full-scale offseason here for Chicago? To me, the first question is not even about the on-ice product. It's about the off-ice product, and what are they going to do to continue building their reputation to kind of regain some trust here of their fans, the stakeholders, and the community, and all of that, because that is going to have to go a long ways. Now, surprisingly, with not a great product on the ice, and of course with all the controversial stuff going on with the Kyle Beach situation, we did see, obviously attendance, I think was fair to say, was impacted some, but for the most part, I think they still did well under the circumstances. But will all that continue? Our season ticket holders going to be, skeptical of renewing? I don't know how all that stands, but I have to think that they're going to try to enlist more of the alumni and some certain members. I know there's been heavily speculated about the role of Ed Olczyk and what he could do in play to kind of help this Blackhawks team, rebuild its reputation. So we'll see what they have to do, but there's lots of work to be done in that regard. Of course, Kyle Davidson is now the permanent general manager. Of course, we've seen some of their talks as well with the upper levels of management and ownership as well, and there's still lots of work to be done. Rocky Wirtz needs to be able to be in the background and not talk a lot, because when he opens his mouth, he seems to create more controversy. So we've seen him get into it with reporters over asking questions over this whole situation. So hopefully that can they can start to move on from this and show, but they need to show what they're doing, in my opinion, to really show that they've learned from the situation. They're taking steps to make sure things like this never happen again, etc. And that reputational piece to me is going to be big on and off the ice. Now, another big question here is, are they going to be going with a full-scale rebuild? Kyle Davidson has talked a little bit about this, but to what extent is it going to go? We'll see what Kyle Davidson does and how he operates this roster, and the changes he makes will certainly answer that question as to how deep the rebuild is going to be. I mean, we've heard him say it could be 3 to 5 years. So, how many veteran players are going to be sticking around? They do need a few guys to stay and obviously be part of the crew that kind of leads the youngsters and teaches them how to be pros and how to win and all those things that take some time. But, how big of this rebuild is it going to be is a big question that we're really not going to know the answer to here. But based on what Kyle Davidson has said, it sounds like it's going to be a full teardown and start from scratch as best they can, of course, because there's some of these players that just can't be moved. Like, you're not going to move Seth Jones at this point. But a lot of other contracts are shorter term and are movable to some degree as well. Of course, the next big question, the third one here, which goes along with the rebuild, is the future of Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They're the two veteran players that remain from their now tarnished dynasty of obviously winning all those Stanley Cups. A lot of the other guys we've seen move on, either through retirement or the contracts are not even there anymore. Like Duncan Keith is not there. The Seabrook's not playing anymore. Host is not playing anymore. These are the two mainstays that are still there, the captain, Jonathan Toews, and Kane. Kane, I think, would have tremendous value. Now, they both have one more year in their contracts, and Kyle Davidson has said publicly that there is a place for them. But I'm not sure that they're going to want to stick around for a 5-year rebuild. I mean, they've said that they felt that the team could be turned around way faster, so I don't know that they'd really want to go through a mega teardown here. If it was going to be comfortable that they could be competitive again in a year or two, yeah, they might. I mean, but does it make sense for them to re-sign Toews and Kane after the contracts expire if they're still there? Probably not. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me to have them there. You want to move those roster spots out, let some younger guys come in and take this team in a new direction. So really, are you going to let your two biggest assets that you've had for the past decade plus just walk away as free agents and ride off into the sunset and play somewhere else if they still want to continue playing? Probably not. So, I mean, at the same time, we've heard a lot of dialogue from the players and from the team that really makes you think there's far from a guarantee that they get traded. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that they're traded in the offseason, but I do think it's a possibility. Patrick Kane is going to get a lot of interest. I know there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to call Chicago over him. Jonathan Toews, I think, will be maybe mild interest, but a lot less of it. So I don't think you're going to see that level push to the point that they're going to maybe really be, interested in getting a deal done. So I think Kane will be way more of an interest here, and they're going to probably have no choice but to really give that serious thought, present that to Kane to see if he'll waive and what happens. And if they're not moved in the summer, it doesn't mean they won't be traded before the deadline. They'd both be on expiring contracts where Chicago could retain half the salary, which they could actually do anyways, really, if you think about it. Yes, they don't have a ton of cap space going into next year, but for 1 year, they could cut their salaries in half for another team to take Patrick Kane at $5 million. That's a joke. Like, he's well worth that. So to me, that would happen in a heartbeat if they wanted it to happen, depending on, of course, what the returns would be, or it could happen at the deadline. But I don't think that Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane both finish the season in Chicago next year. I'm not saying 100% they'll be traded before, but if they're not, I can see them going during. So we'll see where that goes. Of course, another big question they're facing is these RFAs. Are guys like Dominic Kubalik and Dylan Strome part of the rebuild? Would they even consider moving a guy like Alex DeBrincat? The problem here is that they're not old players, right? So a lot of people say, well, they're not old. Why would they move them? Here's the thing, though. They're not old, but they're not fresh out of junior hockey or college hockey either. So they're not like 19, 20 years old. So they're approaching, and they're all like in that mid-20 range now. And by the time the team is good, they're going to be around 30 years old. They might be at a point where they might not want to be there. They might not want to go through a 5-year build. They may not want to, contract-wise, it may not make sense for Chicago. There's a lot of reasons why that it just might not make sense. When a player is going to be until they're, around 30 or 30 plus, by the time the team is ready to compete and really be a solid playoff team again, that might not be appealing to them if they're 24, 25 years old. So it doesn't mean for sure that they're all going to move. To me, they do need some pieces to stay. Strome and DeBrincat do have pretty good chemistry. Maybe they stick around. I know that, for example, with Alex DeBrincat, the only reason I think they even consider it is that he would have huge value. He's still relatively young. He's on a pretty good contract, but for not for too much longer. And the guy can score. Like, he can be a 40-goal scorer regularly, I think, for the next 5 to 7 years. So why wouldn't teams be calling, right? So it's if the interest is there and the offer is big enough, you have to think about it. Same thing with Kubalik, a former 30-goal guy. I think they'll probably find a way to move on from him. But I don't know. We'll see. And another big question is, who's going to be your goaltender next year? They really don't have anybody. They've got Fleury, who they traded, and then, of course, they have Lankinen and Delia, and they're both UFAs, and there's no guarantees that they are brought back. I mean, to me, they're probably going to go on the market and take a goalie either through free agency or trade. So they might either trade with Toronto for Peter Mrazek. They might trade with the Rangers for Georgiev. Maybe they pick up Korpisalo as a free agent, something to that effect. That's probably what they're going to do. Try to get a starting goaltender in that $2 to $3.5 million or so range. Not going to cost a ton of money, but somebody who can play some games, because I don't think Chicago is really going to care too much. They know they're not going to be a competitive playoff team, so they're not as worried about getting a ton of wins and a ton of saves. Yes, they need somebody who's competent, but it's not a huge priority right now, so it's not going to make sense for them to spend a lot of money on it. So to me, that is probably what they do. And obviously, the last thing I want to discuss here is for a team that's going into the beginning of a major rebuild, they don't have their first-round pick this year, and that is a terrible thing. Obviously, they're getting a high pick that they would have if they held on to the pick would be a really good addition to this team moving forward. But, of course, that was included in the Seth Jones trade to the Columbus Blue Jackets. It was only top 2 protected, and where they didn't win the lottery, they have to give that pick up. They'll have their pick next year, but they don't have a first-round pick. So do they try to get back into the first round by making some trades? But the problem here is if you look at the players we've talked about, when it comes to the guys that are questionable, the bubble players that either could come back or could be traded. So we're looking at your Dylan Stromes, your Dominic Kubaliks, guys like that. They're not going to get you a first-round pick for a trade. So that's not going to happen. If you traded Alex DeBrincat or Patrick Kane, you would get one. You might, get a real good one. But that's about the only way you're going to do it. So you don't have a lot of assets that are tradable to get you a great return outside of a couple, and it's debatable if they move those pieces. So, I'm sure they'd like to find a way to get back to that first round. I don't know that they're going to be able to without pulling off something really significant. And will they go that deep of a rebuild that quickly? Time will tell. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. The future of the Chicago Blackhawks will be a very interesting offseason as they try to repair their reputation, take this team into a new direction, and begin what we think is the first offseason of a long-term major rebuild for this franchise. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis. Plus, stay tuned for all the remaining videos in this series and more here at Top Shelf Hockey. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.